Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you're having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. I lost the use of my legs when I was 18 years old after a bad car accident. It wasn't easy adjusting to life in a wheelchair, but over time I've come to embrace my new normal. I even got myself a pretty sweet set of wheels, a custom painted wheelchair with flashy rims and a sound system. Hey, just because I can't walk doesn't mean I can't still have a cool ride. Most people don't bat an eye at my stylish wheelchair. But then there are the Karens of the world who can't seem to mind their own business. I had the misfortune of dealing with one such Karen during a day out at the mall. I was cruising through the mall, popping some wheelies and just enjoying myself. My wheelchair was bumping my favorite tunes, and I'll admit I was riding around with a big grin on my face. As I rounded a corner, I saw a middle-aged blonde woman standing outside the Apple store, arms crossed and a scowl on her face. I could tell by her "I want to speak to the manager" haircut that this was a Karen in her natural habitat. Still, I smiled and nodded politely as I rolled past her. Suddenly I heard quick footsteps behind me, and then a hand grabbed the back of my wheelchair, bringing me to a jolting stop. "Do you think this is funny, young man?" the Karen hissed in my ear. "That wheelchair is for disabled people, not for you to play around in." I twisted around and gave her an incredulous look. I am disabled, lady. This is my wheelchair." The Karen rolled her eyes dramatically. "Oh, please, I saw you popping wheelies back there. You don't look disabled to me. You're just faking it to look cool." I could feel my anger rising, but tried to stay calm. "Whether I look disabled or not, I promise you this is not an act. Now please take your hands off my wheelchair." The Karen scoffed. "In my day, people were thankful to even have a wheelchair. They didn't disrespect the less fortunate by turning it into a toy." At this point, I'd had enough of her garbage. I ripped my wheelchair out of her grasp and turned to face her. "Listen carefully, because I'm only going to say this once. This wheelchair is my personal property. As a disabled person, I'm free to customize and use it however I damn well please. Now get out of my way before I run over your feet, you judgmental old hag." The Karen gasped dramatically, clasping her hands to her chest. "How dare you speak to me that way? I was only trying to teach you some manners. You millennials are all so entitled and rude." I had to resist the urge to throttle her. This woman was absolutely deranged. I don't need manners lessons from someone who assaults strangers and accuses disabled people of faking their conditions. "Now for the last time, leave me alone," I shouted. But the Karen wasn't finished with her tirade. "You know what? I'm calling the mall security on you. They'll confiscate that wheelchair and give it to someone who actually needs it." She whipped out her cell phone and jabbed angrily at the screen. That's when I realized this situation was quickly escalating out of control. As much as I wanted to give this woman a piece of my mind, getting into a confrontation with mall security didn't seem like the best idea. So I did the only sensible thing. I got the hell out of there. I spun my wheelchair around and took off down the mall corridor as fast as I could. The Karen's shrill voice followed me, still threatens to call security, but I didn't look back. After putting some distance between us, I paused to catch my breath. My heart was pounding, both from anger and adrenaline. I couldn't believe the audacity of that woman. It was 2022. How could anyone still be so ignorant about disabilities? And to lay hands on a stranger like that? Unacceptable. For a moment, I considered doubling back to try to reason with her again. But I knew people like that rarely changed their stubborn minds. It was better just to remove myself from the toxic situation. Still, the encounter left me shaken. I decided to call it a day at the mall and head home, not wanting to risk running into that unhinged Karen again. It saddened me that even during a fun day out, I had been so harshly judged and accused simply for having a disability. But I refused to let one hateful person ruin my spirit. I still ride my flashy wheelchair with pride and pop those wheelies whenever I feel like it. It's my life, my disability, and my choice how I handle it. The Karens of the world will just have to find something better to do than harass innocent disabled folks enjoying themselves. If they don't like it, they can look the other way. Or better yet, take a walk in someone else's wheels before passing judgment. The next one is a pro-revenge story. So, a quick bit of info about me. A really traumatic event happened to me a few years ago, which made my existing depression and anxiety issues 100 times worse. I've been struggling in and out of therapy for the last few years. This year, I finally, with medication and therapy, found a part-time job which is helping my mental health, and I'm improving. Now, because of this, I've had to rely on welfare for a while, as I would be homeless without it subsidizing my rent. Where I live, you must go to appointments with a job provider, which is someone who assists you in getting back into life and the workforce and helps manage disabled people in work. I've had fine experiences with most of them, helping set me up with free psychologists to assist with my illness. Others made phone appointments for me when I was in a bad state, unable to leave the house. Basically, they report to the government what you're doing, so you keep your welfare. In comes HB, heartless idiot. The employees at these facilities change every few months because it's a depressing job dealing with people who are at a low in life. My new assigned job provider. During work one week, I had contracted a nasty cold from a client, and out of respect, I called a few days before my appointment and let her know that I had a cold and couldn't come in until 2 days later when I wasn't contagious. You'll need to get a doctor's certificate for that. In my few years sadly in this system, these appointments were more like checkups rather than a strict system. I understand if I was dodging it, but this wasn't anything of the sort. I explained to her that it wasn't so serious that a doctor would issue a certificate for it, but I could go anyway. I asked her politely to reschedule, but she said, "Come in when you have the doctor's certificate." Okay, it's on. I made a doctor's appointment for 2 days later because it was the soonest I could get. I knew my doctor and knew that he wouldn't stand for this. A German man in his 60s with a firm grasp of common sense. I went in and explained that I needed a doctor's certificate for a cold I had over the weekend early in the week. And he told me, "That is the stupidest thing I have ever heard. If you have a migraine, you call in. You can't come to get a doctor's certificate for it. What a waste of taxpayers' money. I won't bill the healthcare system for this. Give her my card and tell her to call me if she has any issues." So off I went home. I called the job provider's head office and explained how upset I was at how I was treated over the phone and how I didn't really want to go to another appointment as it flared up my anxiety. The head office isn't happy to hear that a system that's supposed to support people, especially those who work and need a little help, is giving someone a hard time. But it doesn't end there. So, sadly, I'm told I will probably have to go to the next appointment with her, which she didn't make. So I decided to go up and show her the doctor's card. I went in, and the receptionist came up, and I stated my name, asking for the consultant. Now I have a unique last name. It's long and very, very obvious of what religion race it's from. And I overheard them in the office behind saying, "Oh, it's throw away whatever the heck it is, and I'm not happy." I found it horribly rude how they mocked my last name, so I went into the appointment face to face with this woman for the first time. I explained what the doctor said to me, and her face contorted into a grimace. I asked her to reinstate my payments as she had suspended them for marking me absent even though I called to rearrange. She then tells me I have to do full-time work to qualify for no outside activities, aka forced non-paid work. I explained to her my disability with my mental health and how the last consultant I had helped me by organizing a psychologist as I was not ready to transition to full-time work, as I'd only just gotten a part-time job, and I'm still getting used to that. She doesn't want to hear it and tells me that, well, you can do it or you can have your payments canceled, your choice. Okay, now it's on. You're threatening where I live because you have something against me now? I reluctantly agreed to a second appointment, but I knew I wasn't going to go to it. Oh no. I called head office again as soon as I got out of there to let them know how awful I felt that they mocked my last name, as its heritage was very important to me, and how I felt I was being targeted as I'd never had issues previously. I turned up to the next appointment and was met with the manager, holding a transfer form for me. She spoke to me in a very resentful tone and then went on to slander every other job provider. This won't do. I took the form and submitted it to the other job provider, who said that they didn't sign it. A week or two later, I received an email letting me know that the person in question is now in compulsory courses to teach better understanding, as they had been too cruel towards other people as well. They called me to let me know this as well, where I told them about the slandering. Turns out that's the person on the phone. This woman continued to laugh nervously as I told her how unprofessional it is to slander other companies in front of customers. But you know what? Out of my hair. She told me the transfer should come through soon, and I get to sleep at night knowing HB has to attend compassion classes to not be so rude to people. The next one is a petty revenge story. This is my father's story, and I have permission to share it. We're not native English speakers, so expect some confusion. To give some background, my father's side of the family, his father, 70 years old, my grandfather GF, passed away in an accident about 10 years ago. His mother, my grandmother, GM, 76 years old, is a retired farmer. She injured her back while working as a farmer, underwent a couple of back surgeries, which my father paid for, refused to follow the doctor's orders, and became partially disabled as a result of an unsuccessful physical rehabilitation. For about 20 years, she lived off her children's income. His oldest brother, my first uncle, 1U, 57 years old, lives with his family and provides almost no financial or practical support to GM, but he lives close to GM and visits on occasion. My father is 56 years old. His younger brother, second uncle, 2U, 54 years old, got divorced because he cheated on his wife. He had a high-paying job but spent all of his money on his mistress's cars and houses. When he ran out of money to spend on his affairs, he took out an extensive loan to buy more things for his girlfriends, but he refused to pay for his own daughter's college fund, by the way, LMAO, and went into debt. 2U and my father hate each other because 2U believes my father is overly critical and demanding about what he does. His youngest sister, my auntie, 48 years old, and her daughter, my cousin, CO, 18 years old, lived with GM. Auntie was also divorced because her husband was abusive. She was the primary caretaker for GF and GM, and she did all of the housework. However, she was also laid off as a result of the pandemics and faced significant debt. In the same year, she ended her own life. My father has provided the majority of their income since he was still in his 20s because he worked in a different town and had a well-paying job. He had been sending the majority of his salary to his parents, to the point where he didn't have enough money to save or live a life appropriate to his income. He even told me that he was unable to pay for my college because he must send money to GM, and the program I want does not have a scholarship. My country requires at least a bachelor's degree. So I had to go to a nursing school that provided full financial aid, a free dormitory, free meals, and the scholarship's installments. The year my aunt passed away, 2019, my parents had no choice but to retire sooner than we had planned for a decade. They returned to my father's hometown and became GM's full-time caretaker and housekeeper. At the same time, 2U returned to live with GM after being laid off and suffering bankruptcy, became a freeloader, doing nothing but drinking, smoking, gambling, and flirting with more women, using my parents' money, obviously. I also have to send 60-70% of my salary to GM's house because my parents' savings are not enough to cover additional freeloader living costs, GM's mortgage, all their debts combined, and CO's schooling and allowance. This almost wiped out my parents' savings, but my father was never a favorite child for some reason, despite the fact that he contributed the most money, caused no trouble, and was always available to help GF and GM with anything, medical bills, running errands, etc. Despite this, GM only believed 2U and always scolded my parents without hearing their side of the story. GM also enjoys pretending to be delirious and soiling herself as a punishment, forcing my parents to clean up after her. They took her to the hospital several times because they worried she had dementia, age-related regression or something, but doctors confirmed that her brain function, thought process, and orientation are completely fine. The recent event that broke the camel's back, GM went to check her bank account. As I said before, she is fine physically and mentally, except for being senile and having back pain. She discovered that her balance had dropped by about $5,000 over the last 10 years. She immediately accused my parents of stealing her money, which they did use, but they tried to explain to GM that they used all of their savings to help pay for her everything, because they're running out of money and no longer have a steady source of income. She became enraged, telling everyone she knew that my parents had stolen her money. So after several years of being free caretakers and housekeepers, my parents decided to move to live in the same town as me, and they paid a large sum of money for a moving service, 500 kilometers, 300 miles, to move every necessary appliance, such as a refrigerator, washing machine, air conditioner, and so on, which my parents had used their money to buy for GM over the years, with them. So GM no longer has any appliances, caretakers, or extra money to spend. I hope her golden childs will be there for her from now on because we're no con. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I was stationed on USS Sunfish, SSN 649, from 1991 to 1995. During the time I was there, the crew complement was 130 men, 14 officers, 12 chiefs, and 104 E6 and below, blue shirts. The boat had 3 telephone lines. Having communicated with some of my friends and colleagues on other boats in mine, and our sister squadron, Submarine Squadron 6 and 8, I knew that some boats had their phone lines designated as COXO, Commanding Officer, Executive Officer, officers and chiefs, and the crew line. On Sunfish, however, the 3 phone lines were simply the 3 phone lines. If the phone rang, you picked it up and got the person asked for or took a message. If you wanted to make a call, you chose whatever line was available. That is until late 1993 when our new navigator, Nav, reported aboard. The Nav is the operations department head and is third in command. The new Nav came equipped with his own great ideas on how things were going to be. One of his ideas included changes to the phone lines, which were under the purview of the operations department. Sunfish joined the cadre of boats with specifically designated phone lines. Per his orders, only the CO, XO, and Yeoman, the executive department, were to use the CO/XO phone line. Only officers and chiefs were to use their designated phone lines, and of course the crew had their line. The Nav discussed this policy every single day at muster time. Why? Because everyone rolled their eyes and simply disregarded the new rule. Everyone disregarded the new rule up until he started inspecting. Because, of course, you can't expect much if you're unwilling to inspect. When he saw someone talking on the phone, he'd check what line they were using. Of course, he never checked anyone in the executive department. He bothered the chiefs a bit until the chief of the boat, Command Master Chief, told him to F off and not to talk to his chiefs. The Nav did, however, chew out the officers and blue shirts whenever he caught them using the inappropriate phone for their pay grade. People started grumbling. The Nav stepped up his game soon enough, though, as his phone inspections and ass chewings weren't getting him the quick results he wanted. He had the officers follow his lead. For any calls for blue shirts on the wrong phone line, the caller was directed to call back at the appropriate phone number, then the call was ended. Crap hit the fan. The phones were located in the attack center, AC, Yeoman's office, and the wardroom. While many people went to the AC throughout the day, the fire control techs, FTs, and quartermasters, QMs, were the only ones who primarily occupied that workspace. Previous to the new Nav's arrival, they had to listen to that phone ringing constantly all day. With the Nav's new policy, they muted both the COXO and Officer Chief lines. The Nav forbade the crew from muting any phone lines except for the YN in their office, but whenever he asked who muted those lines in the AC, he just got blank stares and shrugs from whoever happened to be there. As soon as he left, the non-blue shirt lines ended up muted again. Nobody ever wants to answer the phone and have to go running all over the boat to find people. But now the crew started doing the same thing as the officers did. If the phone call was for anyone above the pay grade of E6, they simply told them to call back on the correct line and hung up. Suddenly, quite a bit of work was not getting done, messages weren't getting passed, maintenance with our assigned submarine tender was suffering, due to them not knowing anything about our designated phone lines. Of course, not many people were willing to walk up and down all those decks on the tender, then down the pier when they couldn't get through on the phone. The Nav tried to make the cooks, MSS, answer the wardroom phone, as the wardroom was one of their workspaces. The MSS were always busy, and were never good about answering the phones to begin with. Sometimes they would answer the blue shirt phone, because they were blue shirts, but never the officer chief line, unless an officer was in the wardroom to see them ignore the ringing phone. The MSS would laugh that if they answered the officer chief line, they'd simply tell the caller to hold on, set the receiver down, and walk away. Things simply didn't go well regarding the new phone policy. Leadership, namely the Nav, created the problem. Leadership was blamed for all the setbacks in maintenance and repairs. Leadership was blamed by all the families having trouble reaching their family members aboard ship. The chiefs suffered their setbacks, but were humored by the crap show, and the blue shirts started to love the new phone policy. They got to watch a bunch of things burn down. Of course, when we answered the phone, we had to identify the boat, that the call was on a non-secure line, and state our name. But everyone talked so fast that there was no understanding or accountability as to who answered the phones. It was truly a "the beatings will continue until morale improves" situation. By the numbers, most of the crew made a good time of the whole situation, and really enjoyed pointing out that everything was great until the new Nav showed up. The next one is an entitled people story. Another Reddit story reminded me of this gem that happened a few years ago. I work one-on-one with clients, in a job that's not really a big issue to reschedule usually. A return client had an appointment in the afternoon, but the morning of, I got the tragic news that a dear close friend had passed away. Obviously, I was a mess and asked the client to reschedule due to an emergency. I scheduled him a week and a half later, and when he showed up, I explained why I had rescheduled, and he offered me his condolences. After the services, however, when I was charging him, he turned to me and said, "Well, since you had to cancel our last appointment, could I get a discount?" I literally stared at him for like 10 awkward, cringe-filled seconds before just saying, sure. Gave him a 20% discount basically because my friend died. I took his payment and then made up an excuse to say goodbye quickly. He definitely knew he ducked up as he looked a bit like a dried-up turd when he paid. He tried to book in again, but I made up an excuse to avoid him for like half a year until I got over it. And once I finally booked him in again, he was much more sensitive and calm, and even tipped me afterwards. I don't live in a tipping culture. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already.